yeah, we're going to showcase a React Native group chat app that was built using PowerSync. Yeah, I think Benedikt, I think we can start with a quick introduction to you for everyone here. Yeah, if you could give us some background on yourself and also your developer background, what kind of tools and frameworks you have experience with. Yeah, that would be a great place to start.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, hi everyone. I'm Benedikt. I'm from Germany originally. Currently, I do live in Singapore, and even more currently, I am in Indonesia right now. But yeah, normally based in Singapore. I am in my day job. I'm a solution engineer for Salesforce, but I'm currently on an extended parental leave, I think you call it. So I have some time to work on my own projects and get back to programming. I started as a developer, and that brings us into the developer background as well. Started with PHP, MySQL, and HTML, CSS, building websites and web applications. Then had a very short stint where I did Ruby on Rails programming, which I really liked, but then moved on to JavaScript and then TypeScript. So nowadays my favorite stack and the things that I do and that I feel most comfortable in is writing TypeScript, mainly React, and then for mobile, of course, React Native. Yeah, that's my developer background and the stack basically that I use.
Awesome. Thanks so much for that. And is there some work of yours or some things that you've worked on that's publicly available if people want to check that out?
Yeah, sure. So I do have a GitHub repo. I think I can put it in the chat later. My username is the same as you can see here in GitHub. It's BNDKT, which is basically my first name with the only consonants spelled out. So you can find me on GitHub and Twitter with this username. And on GitHub, you will see that I did 2 libraries for React Native. One to create app clips. So maybe some of you know it. Apple introduced something to use apps without actually installing them from the App Store. They did that already 2 years ago, I think. They haven't really catched on, which maybe partly is grounded in the fact that it's not very easy to do, but with this library, it should be fairly easy to do for a React Native library. So that's one thing which I did. And another library I created allows you to create live activities and widgets for React Native apps. You do have to write them in Swift still, but this library that I built allows you to integrate Swift code into your React Native app fairly easy. And then one recent example that you can look at is I launched an app on the App Store recently, which is called Share My Stack, which is basically a way for people to curate and share their personal productivity stack or also their favorite development stack. And that's an app that I built with React Native as well, and where I used WatermelonDB to build it as an offline first approach. When I started building this, I didn't know about PowerSync yet, and it wasn't really on the scene yet because it's so new for React Native. So yeah, I did it with WatermelonDB, and this was like one of there's another project where I used offline first. So this was the first one where I used offline first and came into contact with this model. And this app that I launched to the App Store, I also made it open source. So you can look at the repo and check out all the code that powers this app.
Excellent.
There's a public parking near me that uses app clips to pay for the parking, and I love it. It's great. I use it all the time. So, yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, I think it's like a really genius idea, those app clips, but
yeah.
I've rarely encountered them in the wild.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, and it was, so just for the context of the audience here, it was because of Benedikt's work on the Share My Stack app that's offline first that we became aware of some of the things that he was working on, and we asked him to build a group chat app using PowerSync in React Native, because we had recently launched our React Native PowerSync SDK, and we were keen to get some folks to try it out. And Benedikt agreed to create a group chat application. So we're going to showcase that today. So Benedikt, I think we can start with just giving people a quick look at the group chat app. We can just kind of quickly show what it's about so people know what we're talking about. And then we can talk a little bit about things like the mental model of working with React Native and PowerSync. And then you can take us through the implementation. How did you set it up? How did you integrate PowerSync? And then we can also go to a proper demo of the application and kind of dig into a bit more detail. But yeah, if you can show us a quick look, I think that would be a great place to start.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to talk about the data model first, and before we look at the data model, I thought it would be good to look at least 1-2 screens so that you have an idea of what this app is about. So when we look at the data model, you can connect it to the screens and the UI that you saw. The idea was to do a group chat app as a demo project. So this is not something where I expect to challenge WhatsApp or Signal with this. It's just like really a demo project to showcase what offline first is about and what PowerSync can do to make this really, really easy and reliable. And yeah, that is what you see here. So really, if you think about the functionality, think basically WhatsApp, Signal, Telegram, whichever group chat app you use. So we have a chat screen where you see the recent chats with either individual people or groups. And then you have a contact screen where you see the people that you connected with on this group chat app. And you can search for people and add them to your contacts. And then you have a settings screen where you can set your own name and username. So basically you log in with an email and a password, and then your profile has a name and a handle, which you can set here, and other people can find you via this name or via this handle or username. And then, you can see the contacts that you are connected with and see the recent chats, and then just look into a chat, for example, and then you see the messages going back and forth. So that's the very basic premise of the app.
Okay, excellent. So I think with that in mind, if you can take us through kind of helping the audience to understand the mental model of working with React Native and PowerSync. What was your start? You can just give us kind of an overview of what was your starting point for this project. How did you approach the development with PowerSync? Where did you start? What were some of the first things that you had to learn about how PowerSync works, and how do you go from there? I think, just kind of talking about the mental model. Let's get into that.
Yeah, sure. So I would say for the very first step, I kind of ignored that it would be offline first and ignored that PowerSync would play a role. And I just thought about the app just in general, right? And how I would approach any app. And I thought about the data model. So the first step for me, and I'm going to show this in a second as well, is to set up the data model. I decided to use Supabase as a backend because I'm familiar with Supabase and love it. And also because PowerSync has a really easy connector to Supabase. So that was like an easy decision. And then I used Supabase to basically create the data model, to define which tables do I need, which columns do I need in this tables, what is the relation going to be between the different entities. And then the next step was where offline first and PowerSync came into the picture. The next step was to now think about if I have this general data model, which for me in my head is the data model that lives on the server, right? It stores all the data of all users. Then to make this step and think about the client and think about, okay, what parts of this data are the clients going to be working with and storing locally, which of course is not all the data, right? It's on the server, we will have all messages from all users, and on the client, we will of course only store the messages from the user that is currently logged in and the people that this user is chatting with, for example. So yeah, this was like the second step then. And yeah, then the third step was already to set up the app, after I had set up the data model on Supabase, connected to PowerSync, which I will show in a minute, and then integrate the sync rules, which I'll talk about in more detail as well. So this is basically the sync rules is basically the formalization of what I talked about a minute ago, of this question, which kind of data do I need on the client, and for which user, which data specifically will be synced and which data will not be synced. And then I set up the React Native app, included the PowerSync SDK, which basically talks to the PowerSync server and to these sync rules that we are going to look at, and receives all the relevant data for the logged in user. And from there, I could start building the screens and work with this data. And in this, like, what makes offline first so like appealing to me is there's the obvious advantage that an app works offline, right? So if you are really offline, you can still work. I mean, for a chat app, that's of like limited usefulness maybe, but still you could prepare a message and even send it, and then it got sent when you are connected again. But for me, like there are many more reasons which are almost more important than really being offline, because of being offline is quite rare, right? It's maybe when you are on a plane or something, but it doesn't happen too often. But having a spotty connection happens often. So for me, one of the main benefits of offline first is the sheer performance, right? The app feels absolutely snappy and data mutations are immediate, because talking to the server happens like as a second step in the background. And also during development, it makes it fairly easy because after I had done what I just said, right, integrate the PowerSync SDK, set up the sync rules, I have all data that I need locally on the device. And then when I build the screens, I just basically work against a local SQLite database. It's kind of like getting back a little bit to, I said earlier that I started with PHP and MySQL, and there I did fully local development as well, right? Where you had like the local database, and feels a little bit like this, simpler, right? You have the local database, you write the query that says, okay, on this screen, I need all the messages, give me the messages. And then basically I take the result of the query and loop through the records and display them in a list on the screen. And if something changes in the database, because, for example, a new message is synchronized from the server, my screen just updates because the React components are just tied to this query in the database. And when the database updates, my React components update. So it makes a lot of things quite easy, to be honest. Yeah, I would say that is like a rough description of the mental model.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, I think we can get into the nitty-gritty now, and I'll let Kobe take the lead on going through that with you. Yeah, I think you can take us through the implementation and share your screen and show people, how you implemented it.
Yeah. And I think for implementation, there are obviously the two aspects to implementation. The one is setting up your sync rules in the dashboard, and the other is then the React Native coding on the client. And maybe we can start with sync rules and kind of show, the connection to Supabase, and take a look at the sync rules as a start.
Yes, absolutely. So maybe before the sync rules, one step before, I would show the data model in Supabase. So we stay with
Excellent.
With the steps I mentioned earlier, and then we will look at the sync rules. So you should be seeing the Supabase dashboard now.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So they do have a nice schema visualization now in the dashboard, so we can look at that. So that is the basic data model. So maybe let me switch to code for 1 second. Do you see Visual Studio Code now?
Yeah.
Okay. So basically with Supabase, what I did is create migrations so that when I set up Supabase either locally or on the Supabase cloud service, those migrations are run and basically the tables are set up. And this is all plain standard Supabase procedure. Right? So what they tell you in the docs, how to create a table, and this is just SQL, right? So I just set up some tables. And now I'm going to switch back to the data model. This is the result of that. So I have some migrations that set up the tables, and they look like this. We have a profiles table. Basically, every user that logs into the app or creates an account gets a user profile where we store the name, for example, and the handle. And then I have something like a demo Boolean value here, which I use to, like there's some stuff in the app where I, for example, distinguish between demo users and real users, because if you want to try the app yourself and you want to have a quick chat, you can create a demo user, which, for example, will reply automatically. So if you send them a message, they will just send a like a dummy message back to you. So that's the user profiles. And then we have contacts, and contacts basically connect user profiles with other user profiles. So if you add a profile into your contact list, there's a contact record for this. So the contact has an owner, which is a profile, and then links to another profile, which is also a profile. And then those contacts you can send a message to. So we have a messages table, and a message is basically just an entry which has some text as the content. And then it has a sender, which is a profile, and it has a recipient, which is a profile. So that would be like super easy. And then to make it a little bit more complex, but I think still quite easy, we also have group functionality. So you can not only send a message to a single profile, you can also have a message where the sender is a profile, but the recipient is a group. And for that, we have a group table. And the group has a name and an owner. So someone creates the group, he or she is the owner and gives the group a name. And then, of course, you add people to the group. And that's what we have the memberships for. So the memberships basically link groups to profiles again to manage the members. As I said earlier, this is a demo app. So of course, there's like many places where you could make it more complex. For example, with the groups, there's not really like a role management. A group has an owner, and the owner can add and remove people and also delete the group. And group members can just be in the group and receive messages, but you cannot make someone else a manager of the group or something like this. So of course,
but I think it captures a decent amount of complexity, like the many-to-many relationship from profiles to itself using the contacts table. I think that's something we see developers ask about a lot. Is, well, how do I implement many-to-many? So I look forward to seeing that in the rest of the implementation as we dive into things.
Okay, cool. Then I would say let's look at the sync rules. So this now, just coming back to the mental model, this is what lives on the Supabase server, and this is a representation of all the data that is there for this messaging app. And now the question is, if we have a single client, a single device from a specific user, which data do we need to sync to this device so that this user can see their own messages and also the messages of the people that they chat with, and also their groups, of course, and their contacts. So let me switch into the PowerSync dashboard. So the first step in the PowerSync dashboard was to create a PowerSync instance. And I'm just going to open the instance that I already have to just show you what is behind this. So the instance gets assigned a URL automatically, and then this instance needs to connect to some kind of backend. And in this case, I created a connection to Supabase, which basically means going into the Supabase dashboard, where in the settings, it will give you all the information like the host name of the database and the username and the password. And also you can download an SSL certificate as a file, and like 5 or 6 different kinds of information. You just take them from the dashboard and I put them in here. So we have the name for the connection, which is Supabase, then the host name for the database, the certificate that I downloaded from Supabase, and then information like the port and the username and password just to connect to this database. And then I can just quickly test the connection, make sure that all the data is entered correctly, and then PowerSync is connected to Supabase. So this is the basic connection, but then the question is, okay, now which data does a user get in the client if they log in? And what I found really neat is that PowerSync just leverages the authentication in this case, which Supabase brings. So let me just open the instance one more time. You see that in credentials, you can specify different kinds of authentications, all coming back to JSON Web Tokens. But in the case of Supabase, I just have to check the box. And then in the app, I use the Supabase authentication, and PowerSync just piggybacks on the JSON Web Token from Supabase and uses this to determine which user is logged in the client. And then I can use this in the sync rules to now specify which data to send to the client. And this is done in this file here, sync rules. So I'm going to open. And here you see the sync rules that I specified for this chat app. And what the sync rules do basically is they create individual and dynamic buckets, which contain the data that is then sent to an individual client, which means like an individual device where the PowerSync SDK is used and where a user is authenticated. And we can just start with the first one to make it more clear. So the first section are the very easy decisions which data to send, where it's just a question of what is the user, and those buckets, they always sections of the sync rules, they always consist of these two different parts. First, we have the parameter, which basically means I select some kind of ID or selector, which I'm going to use then in the following statements to select the data that I want to synchronize. And in most cases, or the most easy scenario for this is that I just have the user ID from the JSON Web Token. So which this line basically means I have the token parameters, which PowerSync gets, and I take the user ID and I use it with the name user ID. And then I can do my selections based on this value. So you see that I have a bunch of SQL queries in the data section here where I say, for example, I want to select all profiles where the ID is the user ID from this bucket. So this first line, what this does basically is it selects the user's own profile so that we make sure that if you log in on a device, your profile will be synced to this device. And this is almost repeated for every table. So for memberships, for example, I want to have all the memberships where the currently logged in user is the profile behind this membership. Or for contacts, I want to synchronize all contacts where the owner of this contact is, again, the currently logged in user. So those are the fairly easy ones, but you can get more sophisticated with this. So Just maybe we'll take just the next one first. You see that I also synchronize all messages where the sender is the currently logged in user. So that means like everything that you write and send gets synchronized to your device as well. But then, of course, I also need the messages where you are the recipient. So in the next line or in the next 2 lines, you see that I synchronize also all the records from the messages table where the recipient ID is the currently logged in user. And what you can also see here is that I can not only make a distinction on the level of whole records, what to sync, but I can also modify the records. So what I'm doing here is I implemented a typing indicator. So I want to show to someone that you chat with that a new message is being prepared. And I'm synchronizing in 2 different ways here, checking whether a message has been sent or has not been sent. And if the message is sent already, so that means it's not a draft anymore, it has been sent, we can synchronize the whole message also to the recipient, because like the sender has sent it, so it's supposed to be read by the recipient. If it's not sent, and that is what you can hear, that is what you can see here. Send at is null, so that means this is a message that has been prepared, so a draft, but it has not been sent. Then we synchronize the message because we use this in the client to indicate to the recipient that a message is being prepared, so to show a typing indicator, for example. But we do not synchronize the content. So there's a field named content, and if the message is sent already, we synchronize it as it is. If this message is not finalized yet, we take this string here, in this case only 3 dots, and replace it, and we synchronize this string as content, because it would be it would not be wise, even if we maybe do not show the message in the user interface, to synchronize data to another user's device which is still in draft mode, for example. Okay, I
So
hope maybe
that's
that
kind of,
gets more clear when we look at it in the user interface.
yeah, that 3-dot syntax might look a bit strange, but if you're typing an iMessage or in a messaging app, you kind of often see those 3 dots as like, okay, this is a draft message that someone's composing. And then you used essentially like a server-side transformation almost, or not really a transformation, but injecting another column into on the PowerSync service, so that's what's synced down to the client.
Another alternative would be I could not use the star and instead like select specific columns, right? And only select, for example, the sender and the recipient and maybe the date, but not select the content. So I do not want to sync it.
That would also work, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, should I go more through the sync rules, or do you think that's clear? Or maybe you can also see if there are any questions at this point.
Yeah, I think if anyone's got questions, drop them in the chat. We'll keep an eye on the chat. But I think for now, that's pretty good as an overview. Essentially, you're partitioning all the Supabase Postgres data to make it like user specific into these partitioned buckets for users, so that each user almost gets their own view into the entire Postgres database, and you don't have to sync the entire Postgres database down to each app or to each user. So I think that gets the point across. And this code will all be made available, and I think this is a pretty good example of some more sophisticated sync rule implementation.
Yeah, exactly, and it will be part of the repository, right? So people can look it up as well.
Yeah, so I think we could probably switch to the React Native side. That was a pretty clear explanation of sync rules. Thanks.
Yeah, then let's look at the React Native side. One thing that I wanted to put on the screen for a second is the repo of the React Native SDK, because if you go into the GitHub repo, or also if you look up the SDK on npm.js in the package directory, basically, you will see the README file from the, and it's also linked from the PowerSync docs. And basically, that is all I used to implement this, right? I looked at the docs, but also this README has all the important steps. So to implement it in React Native, there's a few dependencies that need to be installed. On the one hand, there's the PowerSync dependencies. So there's the React Native SDK, and then there's the SQLite database that needs to be installed as well. So those two I added to the app. And then because the React Native SDK uses, for example, async iterators, which are not supported by at least Expo, I think, or React Native in general, I think as well, there's some functionality that needs to be polyfilled. So if you have worked with React Native, you have probably come across polyfilling, because there's lots of stuff that libraries need that
Did we lose Benedikt?
so we need to add
Okay, he's
poly.
back. You're back. We lost you for
Oh, was I?
4 seconds or so. Yeah, you're back.
Okay. I was talking about the polyfills, and that like if you have worked with React Native, you have probably used polyfills just for functionality that is not there yet in the JavaScript standard that is used in React Native. And that's also the case with PowerSync. So yeah, there's a few more dependencies that need to be installed. And then there's this import of the polyfill that needs to be added somewhere in the app, for example, in the main entry point of the app, so that JavaScript functionality that PowerSync needs, like async iterators, for example, will be available. But those steps are all here in the docs, and I basically just installed those dependencies, added the import here. You have to add something to the Babel config as well, also for those async iterators. And those are all the prerequisites. For people using Expo, I know that some people still use the Expo Go app, which basically means you write JavaScript code and then you have the native Expo Go container to look at the app. That's not possible and also no longer recommended by Expo. I think you can just build an Expo dev client. So that means that you will have an Expo powered React Native app, which includes all the additional native dependencies that are listed here. And that's also something you will see in the code. Yeah, and then basically all the prerequisites are there. Let me just switch into the code. Yeah, maybe quick look at the setup again. So you see in the Babel config, for example, that I added this plugin that is mentioned in the docs. And if we look at the package JSON, you see that I have the Journey app SDK, the PowerSync SDK, and also the SQLite database. I saw that new versions were released today, so I think it's no longer alpha even. There's like a release version. I was too afraid to do the update before the call because I didn't want to break something potentially. So I'll do it after the call.
It should be a safe upgrade. That's more for it's performance stuff, but yeah.
Yeah, I didn't want to risk breaking.
Very wise move. Yeah, wise move. We have the audience saying like basically now on, but yeah, that would be a wild ride.
Yeah, that would be good. Yeah, and then basically what the app needs is let me just open this. So for people who are not familiar with this structure, I'm using expo router, which basically means I have a folder structure, which is defining the navigation structure of the app based on the folder structure. And I have a layout route, which says, for example, in this case, we have a tab navigation with these 3 tabs, which are chats, contacts, and settings. And that is, we switch back to the simulator. That is what you saw in the app, right? We have chats, contacts, and settings. And what I basically need to do to work with PowerSync is on the very top level, or at some top level, right? At the very top level, I have the authentication where I check if the user is signed in or not. But at the stage where I know that the user is authenticated, I basically add a context provider, which is also provided by the PowerSync SDK, which is just a default React context provider, which has the PowerSync context. And if we look into this, we see that this is where the setup basically happens. So here I import the polyfills, and I also have the setup steps, which are also in the README of the SDK and in the docs. So I have to define a schema, and I will open this in a second so that you see this as well. And then I specify the file name of the local SQLite database that will be used within the app container. I have a connector. Just jump into this. The connector basically is the glue between the PowerSync SDK and the backend, because PowerSync works, of course, with different backends, not only with Supabase. I used it with Supabase now in this scenario, but it could be a totally different backend. And what this backend connector does is basically it tells PowerSync how to talk to the backend, because data that is read is coming from PowerSync. And as I showed earlier, I connected the PowerSync server with my Supabase backend. So there we have the connection. But if I now create data in the app, this data needs to be written to the server as well. And this writing to the server will happen via this backend connector. And this is also where, of course, we introduce the authentication to tell PowerSync how to get the user credentials of the currently logged in user to then use this to talk to the PowerSync backend and get the correct data for the currently logged in user.
Yeah, and if I can expand on there, because auth is something that kind of can potentially take a bit longer for people to understand. But the fetch credentials is a function that developers must implement. In the case of Supabase, they can pretty much just copy paste this code. It's pretty standard implementation.
That's what I did. I copied it from the docs and it just worked. So I didn't change anything.
But I will just touch on it a little bit. On line 43, that returns the auth, the credentials used by the PowerSync SDK to connect to the PowerSync service so that it can download data from the sync buckets that have been calculated. And the only really important things there are line 45 and 46. So 45 is your PowerSync URL, which is that instance URL you were showing earlier that gets automatically created when you set up your instance. And then line 46 is just the actual authentication token that your React Native app will present to the cloud service when it's making any API calls. And inside that, if you recall from the sync rules, there was that token parameters.userid. That user ID is embedded inside that token. So those are really the two main things. Expires at and user ID are a little bit for debugging purposes. So I just wanted to add a little bit more color into exactly what's happening inside this fetch credentials function. But like you said, you can copy paste from the docs.
All right, thank you. Okay, so yeah, this is this one I just copied and just connected it to my config file where I stored the PowerSync URL so that this is used here. And back to the context provider. So this is now where this connector is used, and then basically PowerSync is instantiated, initialized, and then the connector is used to connect. I did something today, just today, to enable the app to disable syncing, basically, for demo purposes. So usually this is even easier here because you just connect with the connector. I introduced some code to just, I have a global state, which I call is sync enabled, which you can just switch to the app. So in the settings, we have like a toggle button where you can say sync enabled, and you can toggle it off, and then sync should be disabled, so that the connection is taken away, and basically PowerSync is no longer talking to the backend, which you can use to just try it out to create records, for example, and they do not show up on another device, for example, and they do not show up in the Supabase backend. And then if you come online again, it is synchronized. Yeah, but other than that, it's
going
basically
offline, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Then you have the context provider where you pass in this PowerSync instance, which is now like initiated and configured. And then let's just look at one piece of code. For example, let's take the chat screen. So this is now the screen which shows up in the first tab where you see all your chats. And for this, you see that I am using a hook, which is provided by PowerSync as well, which is called use PowerSync watched query. And as long as this hook is used within the context that I showed earlier, so in one child component of the context, it automatically knows like which PowerSync backend to use, and then uses the connection and basically just executes the query. And here I'm just querying for all the chats. It's in this case, it's a bit of a complicated query because I have group chats and individual chats, and I query them and join them into one. You see that there's a union in here, so I take group chats and individual chats and join them, so that in the end you have one list. You can pass in parameters as well. In this case, a search function which comes from a text, or a search string which comes from a text box. And what is really neat about this hook is that, as the name suggests, it is watching the database, right? So I set up this query, and then basically chats, if I just select it, we can see where it is used down here. So you see down here, I have a list, which is basically just a flat list component from React Native, where I pass in the data, for example, the chats, other data as well, because I have a list that consists of different types of data, and I just render the list to show the chats. And because this is a watched query, that means that if PowerSync synchronizes in the backend and there's new messages or new chats that are synced from the server, the interface will automatically re-render and show the new items without me doing anything for that. So that's quite, in my eyes, it's really powerful and convenient. Do not have to worry about refetching data or like polling for updates or something. I just use this use PowerSync watch query, and I can always be sure that my UI reflects the database.
Yeah, and I think mostly that's what the purpose of all the polyfills were that you needed to install upfront, were to enable the HTTP streaming so that you get those nice live data views in your app, and your code is nice and elegant as well. You don't have like awkward polling timers to refresh the SQL queries or anything like that. Yep.
Yeah. That's, I mean, you see that here's a little bit more code on this page, but that is because I combine different things in the screen. For For example, you can do a search in the screen as well, and then I use a different query. So that's why there's more code here, but it can be as simple as having the query and then having like a list that takes the result of the query. And then you have a screen which always shows the most current data.
Cool.
Okay, I think maybe this is a good time to look at the app and the functionality in more detail, unless there's something I should cover about the code.
No, and what we're thinking, bouncing between the app and the code a bit could work well.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Idea.
Yeah.
And then let me switch to the app. So I hope that you see two different iOS devices now.
Okay, so on the left is an actual device in your hand, and on the right is a simulator.
Yes, correct. And I'm logging in with, so on this one, you see that is the email address with a 2 in the end, and in the left one, I don't have the 2. And for that reason, when I log in here on the left side, you see now, this is my first login. So now it is showing me that data is being synced, right? Because I logged out before, and if I log out, then of course, all the local data is wiped. And now I logged in again, and then the local database is empty. And what you saw with the spinner that was showing for like 2 seconds was the device doing the initial sync, downloading the data from the server. And now I'm logged in. And if I go to the settings tab, you see that on this device, I'm logged in as Ben, and on my simulator device, I'm logged in as Alice. Go back to chat. So if I open the same chat now, for example, I on my device, I'm using the chat that I have with Alice, and then on Alice's device, the chat that she has with Ben, and then we are in the same chat. And what we can do now is, for example, I can send a message from Alice to Ben. I can say, hi. Now you see something that I talked about earlier when we looked at the sync rules. So you can see on the simulator device, Alice has started typing a message, which is hi. And on my actual device, what I'm seeing is the 3 dots. So I'm seeing that Alice is typing a message to me, but I'm not seeing the message yet. And this is something that I found really neat and a really good example for the sync rules, because before we had implemented that, like I had done the chat functionality, and then the idea was to have a typing indicator as well. And then I thought about how to implement the typing indicator. And then the idea was to just, as soon as someone starts typing a message, save this message as a message, as a row in the messages table. And then we can have the send at column to specify whether this has been sent already, or when it has not been sent, then it's obviously in draft mode. And this is really nice, because then we can use this draft message to show to the recipient that there is a message being prepared. And it also means that if Alice now would log in on another device and the message has not been sent, this draft message would be available on the other device as well. So I could start typing a message here, and then I could use another device and open the chat with Ben, and my input field down here would be filled, right? So I would have the message that I started typing on another device, because it's already in the database and it's already synced. So that's really cool. And then I thought about that it is not a good idea to sync a message that has not been finalized, because that basically means we take something that someone started typing out but has not sent yet and already put it on another user's device, which is potentially like a security risk. But going back to the sync rule that we looked at earlier, is this is something really powerful and nice, which you can do with sync rules, where we differentiate between, is the message really sent or not? And if it's not sent, then let's not synchronize the content. Okay, am I still, do you still hear me? Because I just
I
got a
do. Yeah, I did
warning.
also see
Okay.
that warning, which went
Okay.
away. I think it's just a little bit spotty. Are you still there in Indonesia?
I'm still in the middle of a rice field in Indonesia. Yeah.
In the middle of a rice field. Okay. In the middle of a
Yeah.
house, in the middle of a rice field. Yeah. No,
Yes. Yeah,
it's
it's a
pretty
house.
good. It's not too bad. It's not too bad. Yeah.
Okay.
You can carry on. Cool.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's good. Okay, then let's send the message. Let's hit send and send it. So then you see now that I sent it, the full now it falls under the other sync rule, right? So and now the full message is synchronized, which means the recipient gets to see it.
So you hit enter on the keyboard.
Yeah, so
that created a row in the local database on the simulator device. The SDK picked up that the row was in the upload queue, uploaded it into Supabase. The row went from Supabase via the sync rules down to the actual device. So there was quite a lot there, but it happened pretty quickly.
Okay, now let's try this again. But now on my actual device, I'm gonna activate the flight mode. So now I'm not connected to the internet anymore. And there is something that I noticed. The status bar will still show the Wi-Fi signal, which is because I'm mirroring my device via QuickTime. So it is showing. You also see that the time is not correct. It is always showing the same status bar, but I, in fact, don't have internet now, which we will see because now if I send a message, hello, you see that I have a message that I prepared and sent, and on the recipient's side, it's not there yet, right?
So that
And
row is
also, let's
created
maybe
locally, but it's just on the local database and ready to be uploaded, but you're offline, so it's going nowhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. And let's maybe do something else. Let's also create, so I have this search bar here, which I can use, for example, to search in the chat that I have open. But I can also use it to, for example, create a family group in this case. So if I search for family and there's nothing there, it will offer me to create a new group. So I'm doing that now. Select the group. I only have one contact, so let's take Alice and add her to the group and create the group. And then also we can send a message in this group as well.
Guess I'm just thinking now that also makes search nice and fast because all the searches happen locally.
Yes, that's like, for example, let me show you this. If I enter A, for example, it will show me Alice and family because they have an A in there, and it will also offer to create a group called A. If I now press L, it will only show Alice. And this is all really fast. And this is like a use case, updating the results after every letter that I enter. That's something that I would not do if I would need to query the server, right? Because if you, after every letter the user enters, send a ping to the server and query new results, that's going to be spotty, right? There will be a delay. You cannot build it fast enough on the server, basically, to have that really function well. But locally,
if you've got like very low latency to the server, if you've got like very low latency to the server, the user experience can be okay. Returning a search result on every key press, but I found especially when the connectivity becomes a bit spotty, then that kind of like search UX degrades very fast, and it's almost impossible to search. So that's really nice.
And what you usually do is, usually I think you would use like a debounce function to make sure that when the user is typing, you wait for a few seconds or maybe like few or milliseconds, right? You wait for maybe half a second or a second if there's more coming, and then you query the server, right? But you do not you do not just do it after every letter, right? That's
but you don't need a debounce
well.
here.
But locally,
even
locally, I don't care, right? I just the bar that we see on top here, where I now enter an A, for example, if we switch back to the code, that's basically what is stored in this state here. I have the search and set the search as just a basic React state. And that is the parameter that gets passed into the query here, which basically means every time the content of this is updated, and we can look at here's the input field, and the input field just has an onChange text, and then it sets the state. So I just take every change of this input, pass it into the state, into the search state, and the state is used in this book. And just every time the value changes, the query changes as well, and then the results change, and it's super fast. Okay, but now all of this just happened locally, right? And now I want to go back offline. Back online, sorry. So now I'm back online. And now what I didn't really implement is like a good way to check whether I'm back online. So let's maybe just close this once and open this once. I noticed that it can take some time for it to pick up that it's back online.
Yeah, I've got that too in my testing, and part of it is the device, reconnecting to the Wi-Fi, getting connectivity again.
Okay, now it's there. Do you see am I still sharing? Because I got a notification that okay.
Yeah, we can still see.
So now you can see in the simulator, we have the family group with the message in it. So that was a bunch of records that got created, right? The family group, the membership, the message within the group. And that's all synchronized now to the server. And then also because I added Alice to the group, it's also synchronized, or part of it at least is synchronized to Alice's device.
Nice.
And I think we are all already like pretty far into the time here. There's one thing that I wanted to show in the live demo, and then maybe we can see that we move on to the other points. There's one thing that I wanted to show, because I think it's important to think with offline first, to also have in the mental model that offline first, in many cases, will be some kind of hybrid scenario, right? For example, in the case of the chat app, what we do is we synchronize the profiles of the people that you have added as a contact. But of course, there might be many, many more people on the server that are also using the app. And a place where we can see this is if I go to the contacts tab, you see those are the contacts that I have added. And if I start typing, we have again the very fast search. So I can like shorten down the list. But this is again local data. But if I now want to add a contact that I have never chatted before and that I did not have as a contact before, in this case, of course, I need to go to the server. And I solved it in this app by doing the local search whenever the user is just typing. But if the user types something and then hits the search button or enter, I will do a search against the server. So in this case, you can see here, there's a lot more profiles on the server. So those, of course, are not synchronized, because let's say the service has like 1 million people using it. Of course, we do not want to 1 million profiles. So in some cases, I will need to have to go back to the server, which I'm doing here using just the standard Supabase SDK. In this case, not the PowerSync SDK, but the Supabase SDK, because I'm just talking to Supabase directly. But combining the results in one list between the local PowerSync results and the remote server results from Supabase. And the moment that I take one of these profiles and add it to my contacts, for example, let's add Christian here. Now it takes a second. Should be faster. Maybe something didn't work. So it will take a second because now, and this is probably a scenario where in a production app, you would need to do some, you would need to bridge this somehow to add the contact locally as well. Because what I'm doing now is I'm adding this profile as a contact, and because it's a contact, then it gets synchronized to the device as well.
Mhm.
And I don't know why it's not showing up now. Maybe something didn't work in this case.
Click on the plus or
Again with Johnny.
oh,
Okay.
there we go.
Now it worked. Maybe the connection was spotty.
Mhm.
So now they are here because now I added them to my contacts and now they are also synchronized.
Very good.
Okay. There's more stuff to show, like the group management, for example, to add and remove members from a group or to delete a group. But I think in the interest of time, maybe we leave it at that with the live demo. What do you think?
I think so. Yeah, that was great and a very clear explanation of everything involved. Thanks so much. And yeah, any parting pro tips for developers working with PowerSync? I mean, you've been through the process here, and yeah.
Yeah, I think my advice would be to like start with a very simple case, right? To just what I did when I started with the app is my first goal was to have one successful round trip, right? Of very simple data, just to create data locally, have it uploaded via PowerSync into and then synchronized back to the device. And I think this is like the very first milestone that you have set up everything correctly, that PowerSync is talking to Supabase and the app is talking to PowerSync and all the dependencies are installed and the polyfills work. And that was easy and quick, to be honest. And then the next step is to take the data model that you maybe already have or that you created and apply the second step that I talked about. Think about what data needs to be synchronized and how can I express this in sync rules. And the sync rules were something that like is a bit like is a new topic, right? It's like I have not used sync rules before, but in the end, it's just SQL code, right? And it was quite easy to pick it up. And once you get the grip of it, it is really easy to express what kind of data needs to be synced and what kind of data maybe I do only need on demand.
And what was your very first steps? Did you start with one of our demo apps, or did you start with like a blank app? Like right at the beginning?
I started with a blank app. So I just did.
So it was easier for you to start with a blank app.
Yeah. So
Cool.
I'm always using Expo. I know that you can use React Native without Expo as well, but I just created a new Expo app using their CLI. So really just a blank start from scratch. And then I followed the steps from the README of PowerSync, where I just added the dependencies, added the PowerSync context, and then already added the queries and
Cool.
connected the queries to the UI.
Great. I see Frank Calise asked whether the repo is available for viewing. I think it's not public just yet, but we will be making it available.
Yeah, I do want to update to the new SDK version, because also with the hook that I showed, there was in the alpha version, there was one problem with the hook, and then I saw in the repo that there was already a fix, but it was not released yet. So I put this local into the app. So I just want to upgrade to the officially released SDK version, and then I can also remove my own hook from there, and then the code is even it's even less custom code and it's even cleaner. Yeah, but I think that's a question of 1 or 2 days now until we can just make this available.
Okay, excellent.
Yeah, I think when we post this video recording, we will definitely link to the repo as well.
Mm.
Okay, I think that's everything that we have time for today. Yeah, thanks so much, Benedikt. Really appreciate you taking us through this, and thanks to everyone for joining. Any final comments or questions? I see somebody is typing something in the chat, so maybe there's a final question.
Yeah, that was an amazingly clear presentation. Thank you, Benedikt.
All right,
Pleasure.
excellent. Okay, looks like no more questions. So yeah, thanks everyone for joining, and I hope you have a great rest of your week.
Bye.
Thanks, bye.
Bye.